For more than a quarter of a century, the US Census recorded Arabs in the same category as Europeans. White. Most Americans thought that was absurd. The rule was not changed until 2024. But geneticists agreed with it. And here is why. 42,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now Syria and Turkey, one family split in two. One branch moved northwest into Europe, the other stayed, and over time their descendants would be called Arabs. 42,000 years of separation, different languages, different religions, thousands of miles between them. And then, scientists in Qatar took blood from 3,000 Arabs, measured more than 1,300 proteins, the very molecules doctors use to judge health, and found that 89% of the genes controlling those proteins worked exactly the same way as in Germans. 89%. Among peoples who see themselves as completely foreign to each other. How is that possible? When exactly were Arabs and Europeans one family, and why did they forget it? What genetic traces still link the Arabian Peninsula to southern Europe? Traces older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than the word Arab itself. And most importantly, why does this forgotten connection already affect the way scientists read your blood? When we think of Arabs and Europeans, we imagine two separate worlds. The Mediterranean Sea as a wall, Islam on one side, Christianity on the other. Desert against forest, two poles with a void between them. That image runs so deep that arguments about the racial identity of Arabs are often framed as if the answer were obvious. They are different. The only question is how different. The question itself assumes that Arabs are a separate genetic category, clearly cut off from Europeans. But the genetics of the last 10 years have been systematically tearing that image apart. And it starts with a simple fact. Arabs are not a single genetic block. In 2021, the Qatar Genome Project read the DNA of more than 6,000 Qataris and found 5 completely different genetic groups inside one Arab people. Native Arabians, descendants of the oldest population on the peninsula. Peoples who adopted the Arabic language and culture but genetically trace back to other roots. People whose DNA points to Iranian and Caucasian origins. Groups with South Asian and African roots. 5 genetic worlds under one word: Arab. When researchers compared the DNA of these groups with DNA from people around the world, native Arabians were not isolated. On the genetic map, they sat next to Southern Europeans, Italians, Greeks, and Balkan peoples. There is no wall between them, but a gradual transition from Arabia through the Middle East and Turkey straight into Mediterranean Europe. In some places, that transition almost disappears completely. Christian Arabs from Lebanon and Syria carry up to 90% local Middle Eastern DNA and are genetically closer to Greek Cypriots than to Arabian Bedouins. Where does this gradual transition come from? To answer that, we need to rewind tens of thousands of years to a time when Arabs and Europeans did not yet exist. About 90,000 years ago, a group of people left Africa. All non-African peoples on Earth descend from this small group. The Qatar Genome Project confirmed that all Arab groups trace back to the same African migrants as Europeans. Up to that point, the story is shared. But then the paths began to diverge, slowly, millennium by millennium. Genetic analysis of hundreds of Qatari genomes made it possible to calculate exactly when. The ancestors of native Arabians and Europeans split about 42,000 years ago. Arabians split from South Asians later, about 32,000 years ago. And inside Arabia itself, branching continued even later. Different Arab groups diverged 20,000 and 12,000 years ago. What lies behind these numbers? 42,000 years is the ancient Stone Age. No farming, no cities, no writing. People lived in what is now Syria, Turkey, and northern Iraq, hunting and gathering. Picture this: a small group standing on a riverbank somewhere in northern Syria. A few generations later, some of them will end up in the Balkans. Others will be on the Arabian Peninsula. They do not yet know that they will never meet again. that their descendants will speak different languages, build different civilizations, and forget that they were once one family. A glacier is pushing down from the north, squeezing the land where people can live. Some move west into Europe. Others stay, and later, as Arabia becomes drier, they shift toward the peninsula. Two streams from one source. But 42,000 years is a huge span of time. Long enough for languages to become unrecognizable, for appearance to change, for kinship to blur beyond recognition. By logic, over that length of time, two descendants of one family should have become genetically unrelated. So why do modern data show the opposite? Because the split was not final. Between the two branches, there was still a bridge, the Middle East, the territory both paths crossed. About 10,000 years ago, an event in the Middle East changed the genetic map of the entire continent. People began growing grain and domesticating animals. The Neolithic Revolution, the shift from hunting and gathering to farming. These first farmers carried a particular genetic profile, a mix of ancient Middle Eastern hunter-gatherers and people from Turkey. And they became the bridge that permanently linked the future Arabs and the future Europeans. One wave of farmers moved west through Turkey into the Balkans, Greece, Italy, and farther into Europe. They brought farming, pottery, and their genes. Over several thousand years, they replaced or absorbed most of the local hunter-gatherers, and their DNA became the foundation of Southern European peoples. One concept needs explaining here. A haplogroup is a genetic marker of lineage, a kind of surname in DNA. Male haplogroups are passed from father to son through the Y chromosome, while female ones pass from mother to child through special mitochondrial DNA. Each haplogroup has an alphanumeric code, and geneticists use those codes to trace where ancestors came from. Here is the point. The male haplogroups J2 and G2A, which modern Europeans often think of as their own, actually came from the Middle East. A large study of ancient DNA, Southern Ark, confirmed that early farmers in the Balkans and Greece carried exactly these haplogroups, and they came from Turkey and Iran. To this day, Southern Europeans still retain a substantial share of DNA inherited from those Middle Eastern farmers. Another branch of those same farmers stayed put. The Qatar Genome Project showed that native Arabians are genetically closest to ancient hunter-gatherers and early farmers of the Middle East. This means that Arabians and Middle Eastern farmers come from the same ancient population that lived from Syria to Arabia before farming began. The farmers who moved into Europe carried part of that heritage with them. The ancestors of Arabians preserved another part. A Southern European and a native Arabian carry the DNA of the same ancient people. Different paths, different millennia, but one source. Still, if history had stopped in the Neolithic period, this genetic similarity would have faded over time. But history did not stop. Arabs and Europeans met again, more than once. After the Neolithic, the Mediterranean turned into a corridor of exchange. Trade, culture, and genetics. The Phoenicians founded Carthage. Greek colonies spread from Turkey to Marseille. The Roman Empire absorbed the Middle East and North Africa. And then, in the 7th century, the Arab conquests came, and the genetic flow reversed. Genetic analysis has found traces of mixing between Qataris and Southern Europeans, especially Tuscans. The researchers connect this to Arab Islamic expansion and Mediterranean trade over the last 1,500 years. But the flow went both ways. In Kuwait, a study of DNA from 583 people identified a group with Caucasian European roots. When scientists broke down their DNA into components, one group showed about 54% linkage to Northern and Eastern Europe. More than half European, in the population of the Persian Gulf. The mixing dates back about 500 years. The Southern Ark ancient DNA study confirmed this exchange. Skeletons from the Eastern Mediterranean and ancient Iraq, about 3,000 years old, carried haplogroup J1, the main male lineage of modern Arabia. And ancient farmers from the Balkans carried J2 and G2A, both of Middle Eastern origin. Every era, Alexander the Great, Rome, the Arab conquests, added a new layer of genetic exchange. But male lines are only half the story. Haplogroups are not passed only through the father's line. There are maternal ones too, through special DNA passed from mother to child. Among Qatari Arabs, maternal lines typical of Turkey and southern Europe are dominant. For centuries, women from Europe entered Arab communities, while male lines remained Arabian. Men preserved Arabian roots, women brought European genes. One haplogroup captures this history better than most: TM70, a lineage rarely mentioned in popular DNA videos. Its common ancestor lived about 45,000 years ago. It does not make headlines because it is not associated with any one particular people. And that is exactly why it matters. TM70 belongs to everyone at once. It is most common in Djibouti, where 56% of men carry it. In Sassoon, Armenia, it reaches 20%. In the Tunisian city of Westlecia, it is 17%. And now Europe. Portugal, 11%. Sicily, 5.5%. Corsica, 4%. One male lineage stretching from the Red Sea to the Atlantic. Among Tunisian Arabs, all its carriers trace back to a common ancestor who lived about 9,200 years ago. The Neolithic, the very age of the farmers. And here the most surprising contrast emerges. Two Tunisian cities, Kairouan and Westlecia, are only 31 miles apart. Both are considered Arab. But genetically, they belong to different worlds. In Kairouan, almost 84% of male lines are Berber, native to North Africa. Middle Eastern input is only 14%. In Westlecia, the picture is reversed. 72% of male lines are of Middle Eastern origin, and the main Arabian haplogroup, J1, reaches 52%. The Arabs of Kairouan are genetically Berbers who adopted Arabic. The Arabs of Westlecia carry a real genetic trace of Arabia. At the same time, both cities contain typically European male lines, haplogroups R1b, R1a, and I. There are only a few of them, 3 to 4%, but they are there, and behind them are traces of Phoenicians, Romans, Vandals, Normans, Spaniards, and Italians who passed through North Africa over the last 3,000 years. Genetic exchange between the Arab world and Europe has never stopped. But if all of this is just history, just academic percentages, why should an ordinary person care? Here is why. In 2023, a team from Qatar carried out a large-scale experiment. They took blood from nearly 3,000 Arabs, measured the levels of 1,301 proteins, the molecules doctors use to assess how the body is working, and asked a simple question: which DNA regions control the amount of each protein? Then they compared their results with data from two major European studies, one German and one British. The result: of the genetic gene-to-protein links found in Germans, 89% were exactly the same in Arabs. In 82% of cases, the same effect came from the same mutation at the same spot in DNA. Different continents, the same biochemistry. Using data like this, scientists build genetic calculators, tools that predict the levels of specific proteins in a person's blood from their DNA. Almost all such calculators are built on European data and lose accuracy when applied to other populations. But for Arabs, calculators created from Iceland's Decode Genetic project retain about 80% of their effectiveness. The loss is only 20%. For peoples separated by thousands of miles and, on the surface, with completely different histories. Now you understand why 42,000 years of separation did not erase the kinship. Shared ancestors, the Neolithic bridge of farmers, thousands of years of Mediterranean exchange, shared haplogroups, all of it preserved the genetic closeness between Arabs and Europeans. A closeness now measured by how accurately genetic tools built for one group work for the other. The connection both sides forgot was recorded deeper than any cultural memory. 42,000 years ago, One family went in different directions. Some became Europeans, others became Arabs. They built different civilizations, spoke different languages, and prayed to different gods. The Mediterranean Sea divided them, and the same sea brought them back together again and again. Farmers, Phoenicians, legionaries, merchants, conquerors. Every meeting left a genetic trace. Every trace made the separation a little less final. Today, when a geneticist takes blood from a Qatari Arab and compares it with blood from a German, they do not see a gulf between strangers. They see 89% shared genetic mechanisms. They see haplogroups that traveled from the Middle East to the Balkans and back over thousands of years without stopping. They see two relatives who forgot each other, but whose blood remembers. Remember the white category in the US Census? The officials who, for decades, recorded Arabs in the same category as Europeans may not have known genetics, but they were closer to the truth than they realized. If you are Arab, your DNA carries lines that helped build the first villages of southern Europe. If you are European, your genes contain markers that first appeared in the Middle East long before the very idea of Europe existed. And when scientists take your blood and read it with a genetic calculator built from data on the other side of the Mediterranean, it works. Because between you and them, there is no wall. Between you and them is a bridge 42,000 years long, and through it, the same blood still flows.